I'm sure I'm not the only one who has some very fond childhood memories of going to the circus. As a child, I used to love going to the circus, and perhaps one of the highlights for me was seeing the elephants. The elephants, of course, being massive animals, and they always seemed to be smiling. Whether they were actually happy or not is a discussion for another time. And one of the questions you have to wonder and think about is how do they get these big, large animals to stand in place? How did they get them to become so disciplined? After all, every trainer recognizes and realizes that all it takes is one smack with the trunk or one stomp with the foot, and the elephant can completely overtake his trainer. But yet, elephants in captivity, in the circus, always came across as being quite obedient. So how did they actually get them to stand in place? So I'm going to answer that question, but first I want to digress for a moment. I can't really call it a digression, and talk for a moment about the parsha. In this week's parsha, we read Parshas Chukas, actually a double parsha, Chukas Balak. And in the first parsha, Parshas Chukas, we talk, among other things, about the sin of Moshe Rabbeinu. I'm calling it a sin. The Torah, of course, is somewhat vague, actually rather vague. The Torah doesn't really identify very clearly what exactly it is that Moshe did wrong. We do know that the people were thirsty. They wanted water. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives Moshe very clear instructions as to what he's supposed to do, which includes taking his staff, the mat, in his hand. But he was told to speak to the rock. And as we know, Moshe goes ahead and takes the staff and hits the rock. But of course, it's difficult to know exactly why this was such a terrible thing. After all, we read earlier in the Torah in Parshas Beshalach that when the people were thirsty, Kadosh Baruch Hu instructed Moshe actually take the staff and hit the rock. So there can't be anything so terrible about hitting a rock if, after all, it was good earlier. So this is a big question, and there are many different interpretations. Rashi, of course, perhaps being the most famous for the purpose of this conversation, says the sin was hitting the rock. The Ibn Ezra said the sin was hitting the rock twice. The Rambam says that he got angry. All the different explanations. So I want to actually suggest somewhat of a new idea, even though I don't think it's incredibly creative. Maybe actually fits in with many of the other explanations that have been offered. When you think about it, the people were complaining. They were saying, it's terrible here. Why'd you bring us here? There's nothing to eat. There's nothing to drink. We're just wandering. There was a lot of complaining in the desert, as we know. Now, when you think about it, how do people complain? Typically, sometimes people do complain with their hands and their feet. But generally speaking, what we use to express our displeasure, when we're frustrated, when we're angry with other people, we use our mouths. That's how we complain. Our mouths, even though they may not seem on the surface like they could be terribly destructive, but we know that words can in fact be quite destructive. And perhaps, Moshe was being instructed over here by Kadosh Baruch Hu to demonstrate to the Jewish people that words actually do matter. Words are not just ideas. Words are actually things. When you think about it, the word in Hebrew for word is davar. That is a thing. And it is also the same word that we use for word. So that same three-letter shoresh, Dalid Beis Reish, means thing and it means word. And perhaps, through Lashon HaKodesh, we are being enlightened to understand and to recognize that words actually matter. They are real things, and they are not to be just simply dismissed as, well, sticks and stones can break my bones, but words will never harm me. That's not true. Words can cause great harm. They can be very destructive. Words can actually be very constructive as well. Words can literally create. In fact, if you take a look at the very beginning of the Torah, when Hashem creates the world is created through speech. Vayomer Elokim Yehi Or. God spoke and brings the world into being. Baruch she'amar v'haya ha'olam. And later on in history, when Hashem gives the Torah to the Jewish people, at the moment of Maimon Har Sinai, when he introduces himself, so to speak, to the Jewish people, he does so by delivering what we call the Aseret HaDibros. We translate as commandments, but it's not really commandments. God speaks to the people. So speech can be very powerful. So perhaps Moshe Rabbeinu was being told, you know what, now you have an opportunity to go ahead and to demonstrate to the people that you can actually speak. And it really matters. It has a real effect. I have the staff in my hand, but I don't need to use it. By my speech alone, I can actually go ahead and with HaKadosh Baruch Hu's help, with his assistance, bring water forth from this rock. And so perhaps the great failure the part of Moshe Rabbeinu over here was that there was an opportunity to really teach, to demonstrate in a way that perhaps could have been inspiring, that they could have taken a moment to reflect upon their own use of speech and say, you know what, we're always complaining, we're always using our mouths in such a destructive way, but there is a tremendous potential when it comes to the koach hadibur. When it comes to the ability to speak, we can be very constructive, it can be very positive, it could literally bring water forth from a rock. Obviously that's not something that you and I can do, but in the right setting, with the right siyata d'shmaya, anything is possible with words. And so therefore, perhaps, Moshe's sin over here was a failure to really teach, to turn this into a very positive, teachable moment. Yan lo himantim bi lahaktisheni. It wasn't merely a failure of creating a Kiddush Hashem, but one that would have been very, very instructive, one that could have been a very, very positive lesson for the people. Now, what does this have to do with elephants? So going back to elephants, what I was told is the way that the elephants were actually trained to stand in place is that when they are very young and relatively small, we know that elephants are large even when they're born, but relatively small, so they'll take a stake and put it in the ground and take a chain and put it around the elephant's foot. At that point, the elephant is not strong enough to go ahead and to walk away. And so the elephant tries, moves a little this way, a little that way, and realizes, I can't go anywhere. And the next morning, the elephant once again tries and realizes, as long as there's a chain around my foot, so there's nowhere for me to go. Slowly but surely, the elephant continues to grow and mature and becomes a very, very, very large animal, thousands of pounds. At any given point, the elephant could just go ahead and decide to get up and walk and to move away. But what's remarkable is that it chooses not to, because it has learned that as long as I am attached to the ground, I can't break away from this. But of course, we realize that that's not true. The elephant doesn't have the intelligence to recognize and to realize that actually you're much larger now than you once were, and all you need to do is decide to get up and to walk away. But elephants, which are not created with the intelligence, they are very intelligent animals, but not with the intelligence of a human being, doesn't realize that on their own. And I'm mentioning this because I think it's a powerful mashal. We also don't always realize the incredible potential that we have specifically within the realm of dibur when it comes to speech. We have incredible strength. We have incredible power and potential when it comes to the koach hadibur, when it comes to speaking. And perhaps the sin of Mei Meriva, Moshe and Aaron had an opportunity to redirect the people, to instruct them and to show them, what you say really matters. When you speak a certain way, it really, really has an impact. It can destroy, it can create, and perhaps Moshe and Aaron really, unfortunately, did not use this opportunity in the way they should. And so therefore we should all, hopefully, when we come back to this parsha, Parshas Chukas, we should realize and recognize and appreciate the incredible koach hadibur. Usually we don't necessarily look to find a connection between the first parsha and the second parsha, and we have a double parsha, but over here it's too easy to ignore. Parshas Balak is a story, which of course there's a whole storyline there as well, but it contains a very, very powerful demonstration of how amazing speech can be, both in a positive way and in a negative way. Bilam is commissioned to go ahead and to use his koach as a navi, as a prophet, to go ahead and to use words in a way that would cause tremendous harm and destruction. HaKadosh Baruch Hu interferes, and that which, from his perspective, him being Bilam, was sort of a corruption, HaKadosh Baruch Hu completely transforms. He converts his negative speech into something that was positive, into something which served as a vehicle of bracha, as Bilam reflects in a very, very positive way upon the Jewish people, leaving us with many, many perspectives for all generations, all once again generated through and with the koach hadibur. So from Parshas Chukas and Balak, we should really be inspired to recognize and to appreciate our own power. Sometimes we're like that elephant who has this perception that I can't do anything. What am I going to do? I'm powerless, and we don't realize that's not true. All we need to do sometimes is open our mouth. We need to know when to open our mouth. Sometimes the greatest power in the world is dafka to say nothing. Sometimes the greatest koach is to be silent. That's also a demonstration of gvur. But you have to know when to speak and when to be silent. Eis l'shtok ve'eis l'daber. There's a time to speak and there's a time to be silent. But from Parshas Chukas and Balak, we certainly see that there's a tremendous potential that we have when it comes to speech. We should all be inspired to use our speech in a positive way. We should recognize the incredible endowment that we have as human beings. Right? The Torah tells us, "Vayipach bi'apav nishmas chayim," that HaKadosh Baruch Hu instills and breathes the soul into man. And the Targum Onkelos tells us that is that when man was created as a ruach mamalala, a being that was able to speak, a speaking being. So we should be inspired by this idea, and all try to develop with more focus in a more deliberate way, a koach hadibur, so we could use our speech only and always in the most positive way. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful Shabbos.